What's the worst thing your mother-in-law ever crossed that finally made you explode? When I married Jake, his mother, Linda, seemed like the perfect mother-in-law. She baked homemade chocolate chip cookies every Sunday, sent thoughtful birthday cards with handwritten notes, and told everyone at the wedding reception how lucky her precious son was to have found such a wonderful girl. For the first year, I was actually grateful. My own mother died of cancer when I was 20, and Linda filled that painful void beautifully. The red flag appeared at first, subtly and seemingly innocently. She'd come into our apartment when we were both out of work, claiming she was just dropping off leftovers from dinner or fresh flowers from her garden. I would return home, exhausted from night shifts, to find my kitchen completely rearranged. My mail would be opened and neatly stacked, and my bedroom door would be ajar, even though I knew I'd closed it that morning. When I mentioned this to Jake over dinner, he simply laughed, with that easy smile I'd fallen in love with. "She's just happy to finally have a daughter," he said, reaching out to squeeze mine. "Mom's been waiting for this for 30 years. Give her some time to get used to sharing me." But Linda's surprise visits became a daily occurrence. Then she began making subtle comments about my housekeeping skills, my cooking techniques, even my choice of clothing, always with that sweet grandmotherly smile, always carefully framed as helpful suggestions from someone who simply wanted the best for her son's happiness. She would run a perfectly manicured finger along the kitchen countertops, checking for dust. She would rearrange my spice rack into alphabetical order, explaining with excruciating meticulousness the proper way to organize an efficient kitchen. She would hold up my work uniform with a disapproving expression. "Honey, I'm just trying to help you become the wife Jake truly deserves," she would say in her saccharine voice. "A man should be proud of his woman." After that, the boundary violations quickly became more frequent. She made me an appointment with a gynecologist without my knowledge, claiming to have found a great fertility doctor. She threw away my birth control pills, insisting they were expired, even though I had picked them up from the pharmacy only 3 days earlier. When I confronted her about it, she dramatically clutched her chest and burst into tears. "I only think about my future grandchildren," she sobbed. "Don't you want to give Jake the family he's always dreamed of?" Jake always took her side. Family loyalty was everything to him, and Linda was a master manipulator who had perfected her craft over decades. She cried about feeling unwanted and pushed aside, about losing her only son to another woman, about how different and disrespectful things had become in this generation. I began to feel like a villain for wanting the basic privacy of my own home. Looking back, I can see how carefully Linda had built Jake's psychological dependence on her approval. His father died when Jake was 12, leaving Linda a young widow with a damaged son who desperately needed stability. Instead of encouraging healthy independence as he grew up, she systematically trained him to see herself as the final authority on every decision in his life. She chose his friends based on whether their families met her social standards. She sabotaged his early relationships with cruel comments disguised as motherly concern. She controlled his college choices, his career path, even his hobbies and interests. By the time I met Jake at 28, he was a successful engineer who couldn't pick a restaurant for dinner without calling his mother first. Initially, I found his family loyalty charming. My own childhood had been chaotic. My parents divorced when I was 15 and spent more time fighting than caring. Jake's obvious love for his mother seemed proof of his capacity for loyalty and devotion. I was too naive to recognize the difference between healthy family ties and psychological control. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months later. I was working from home, sorting through patients' charts, when I heard the front door creak open. Linda walked in without knocking, carrying industrial cleaners and a heavy toolbox. Apparently, she had made copies of our keys without telling us. "Surprise, honey," she announced cheerfully. "I'm going to completely redo your bedroom today. That awful gray is so gloomy and depressing." I found her methodically removing our wedding photos and carefully replacing them with old family snapshots in which I was nowhere to be found. She had already moved our furniture and was putting up new curtains, bright pink and ridiculously puffy. Not at all our modern minimalist style. "Stop that right now," I said firmly, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. "This is our house, not yours." She turned to look at me with cold, calculating eyes, her sweet mask completely falling for the first time. "Actually, honey, the lease on this apartment is Jake's, and Jake is mine." That's when she pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my blood run cold. Photos of me, dozens and dozens of them, getting dressed in the morning, in the shower, sleeping peacefully in bed. She took secret photographs during all these innocent visits. Insurance, she said calmly, scrolling through the images with practiced ease. In case you ever try to turn my son against me. My hands shook uncontrollably as I stared at the screen. There I was, completely unsuspecting and vulnerable in my own bedroom. Some of the photos were taken through our bathroom window while I was showering. Others showed me asleep, my face peaceful and trusting. The most disturbing images captured intimate moments between Jake and me. Our private conversations, tender gestures, even arguments we had considered completely private. The timestamps showed that she had been systematically documenting my private moments for months, building a twisted archive of incriminating evidence. Some of the photos were dated as recently as 2 weeks after our wedding, meaning she had begun her spying campaign almost immediately. "You're absolutely sick," I whispered, stepping back from her. Linda's smile widened, revealing teeth that suddenly seemed predatory rather than maternal. "I'm protecting what's mine. There's a big difference, honey." She explained her diabolical plan in the same matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss dinner recipes. If I ever tried to leave Jake or turn him against her, she would claim I was mentally unstable and an exhibitionist. The photographs would serve as evidence that I had deliberately exposed myself for attention, that I was sexually depraved and dangerous. She had already consulted a lawyer friend about the procedure of having me committed to a mental hospital. "Jake will believe every word I say," she said with absolute certainty. "He always has and he always will. I am his mother. I gave birth to him. I raised him. I know him better than anyone." Linda continued her monologue, detailing how she would destroy my reputation and credibility. She would tell people that I was a gold digger who seduced her innocent son for his money. She would claim that I was abusive, manipulative, and perhaps even dangerous to children. She would use the photographs to paint me as mentally ill, someone in need of professional help and incapable of making rational decisions. "I've done that before," she said matter-of-factly. "Jake has had several girlfriends who thought they could replace me in his life. They all eventually learned otherwise." Something deep inside me had snapped that day. Not the explosive, screaming anger that burns out quickly. The cool, methodical anger that comes with a perfect understanding of what needs to be done. I forced my face into neutral and nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right about Jake," I said carefully. "He really does always trust you more than anyone else." I spent the next hour pretending to accept her remodeling while secretly recording our entire conversation on my phone, hidden in the pocket of my work uniform. Her casual admissions of surveillance, her detailed threats of forced placement, her step-by-step explanation of how she had systematically manipulated Jake into choosing her over me, just as she had done with every other girlfriend he had ever brought home. She even bragged about the specific methods she'd used to ruin previous relationships, how she'd intercepted text messages and emails, spread rumors among Jake's friends about his girlfriend's supposed infidelity, and staged emergencies in medical crises to interrupt important dates and milestones. That little Sarah thought she was so smart. Linda laughed, referring to Jake's most serious previous relationship. She lasted almost 2 years before I completely broke her. She eventually became so paranoid and anxious that Jake was glad when she finally left. He even thanked me for helping him see her true nature. When Jake returned home from work that evening, Linda was gone. Our bedroom looked like a shabby chic nightmare, but I was acting completely normal. I even genuinely admired the hideous new curtains. "Your mom really outdid herself tonight," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "She's incredibly thoughtful, taking the time to make our home beautiful." Jake practically glowed with pride and relief. "I knew you'd change eventually and see how much she cares. She just wants to be close to us, to be a part of our lives together." That night, with Jake sleeping peacefully next to me, I began my methodical exploration of Linda's dark history. What I discovered made me shudder. This wasn't her first campaign of psychological warfare against one of Jake's romantic relationships. I started by carefully combing through Jake's social media history, looking for traces of the girlfriends Linda had mentioned. I found photos and posts from years past, showing Jake with different women at different stages of their relationships. The pattern was always the same: initial happiness and public displays of affection, then increasingly tense interactions, then a complete disappearance from his social media. I found Jake's ex-girlfriend, Sarah, through careful social media browsing, and sent her an extremely cautious message, unsure if Linda was still monitoring her correspondence. Sarah's reply came within hours, and it chilled me to the bone. She has pictures of me, too. Hundreds of them. I was too scared to tell anyone because she convinced me that no one would ever take my word against that of a respected widow. Sarah agreed to meet me for coffee at a place far from our neighborhood. She was a beautiful woman in her 30s, but I could see the lasting damage in her eyes. The way she constantly scanned the room, the way she flinched when strangers came too close to our table. Linda ruined my life for 18 months, Sarah told me, her voice barely above a whisper. She started so subtly, I thought I was going crazy. Things were disappearing from my apartment. My car was being scratched in parking lots. I was getting anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Sarah described an escalation of harassment that mirrored my own experience. Linda gained access to her apartment through Jake and then began systematically violating her privacy. She installed hidden cameras in Sarah's bedroom and bathroom. She went through personal belongings, read her diary entries, even stole prescription medications. The scariest thing was how she convinced Jake that I was the problem, Sarah continued. Every time I tried to tell him what his mother was doing, she had some innocent excuse. She would cry, saying I was trying to isolate Jake from his family. She said I was paranoid and jealous. Sarah showed me some of the evidence she had saved: threatening notes left on her car, hidden camera photos of herself, even phone recordings of Linda posing as other people to spread lies about Sarah's character. I finally left because I was having panic attacks every day, Sarah admitted. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't work. Jake thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Linda convinced him I needed professional help and that maintaining our relationship would only make me worse. Over the next week, I discovered that Linda had systematically destroyed Jake's 3 previous serious relationships using identical tactics. She photographed women without their consent, manipulated situations to make them appear unstable, and then presented herself as the voice of reason when Jake inevitably became confused and overwhelmed by the manufactured drama. I contacted Jake's other ex-girlfriends through Sarah. Maria, who dated Jake for 6 months 3 years ago, confirmed the same disturbing pattern. Linda had sabotaged her job by calling her employer with false claims of drug use. She sent fake text messages from Maria's phone to other men, making it appear that she was cheating on Jake. I tried to prove my innocence, but Linda was always one step ahead, Maria explained during our phone conversation. She would delete evidence from my phone before I could show it to Jake. When I accused her of sabotaging me, she would act shocked and hurt. Jake thought I was having some kind of psychotic episode. The third friend, Rebecca, lasted only 4 months before Linda's campaign kicked her out. She convinced Jake that I was only interested in his money, Rebecca said. She would put expensive items in my purse and accuse me of stealing them. She would forge credit card applications in my name and mail them to Jake's address, making it appear that I was trying to steal his identity. Linda had honed her techniques over years of practice, learning the psychological pain points that made young women feel helpless and isolated. She understood how to exploit the natural insecurities that arose in new relationships, how to create the doubt and confusion that would ultimately destroy the relationship between Jake and anyone who threatened her control over him. I spent the next 2 weeks meticulously documenting everything, while maintaining my cheerful facade in front of Jake and Linda. I installed tiny hidden cameras throughout our apartment, disguised as decorative objects and smoke detectors. I changed all the passwords on our shared accounts and created new email addresses that Linda couldn't track. I researched the laws of voyeurism, stalking, and harassment. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in privacy violations and began building a smoking gun. I learned about digital forensics, evidence preservation, and the specific legal requirements for prosecuting psychological manipulation crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed Jake to see Linda's true nature for the first time. He had been conditioned since childhood to view her as his protector and ultimate source of truth. Providing him with documents and records would not be enough. He needed to experience her manipulation firsthand in a way that couldn't be rationalized or explained away. I planned the perfect psychological trap, using Linda's own controlling instincts against her. During one of her daily visits, I casually mentioned that I was concerned about Jake's recent behavior. He's been working so much lately, I said, letting genuine concern show in my voice. Sometimes I wonder if something bad has happened that he's not telling me. He seems distant and distracted. Linda took the bait immediately, her eyes lighting up at the possibility of marital problems she could exploit. I've been worried about that too, she confided, leaning in close as if in conspiracy. Men sometimes start looking elsewhere when they're not being properly cared for at home. It's just their nature. I suggested that we surprise Jake with dinner at the office to test him and perhaps catch him in some deception that was causing his changed behavior. She readily agreed, almost vibrating with excitement at the prospect of catching me failing as a wife and proving her superiority as a woman who truly understood Jake's needs. What Linda didn't know was that Jake didn't actually work late. He was secretly taking a ceramics class twice a week at a community college, a creative hobby he kept hidden because his mother had always derided artistic endeavors as feminine and useless. Not only did I know about the classes, I actively encouraged his newfound passion for working with clay, even buying him professional tools and helping him set up a small studio in our spare room. This was something Linda's strict worldview would never allow her to understand or support. She had spent Jake's life suppressing any interests that didn't fit into her narrow definition of male success. He even hid the ceramics lessons from me at first. So programmed was he to expect criticism for anything creative or unconventional. We arrived at Jake's downtown office building promptly at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. His parking space was as empty as I knew it would be. Linda's face lit up with confidence and barely suppressed glee. He's obviously having an affair, she announced solemnly, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I warned him he would if he married someone so young and irresponsible. Men need mature guidance to avoid making mistakes like that. I pulled out my phone and called Jake while Linda stood next to me, listening to every word of our conversation. Hey, honey, we dropped off a surprise dinner at your office, but your car isn't here. Are you okay? Is everything okay? Jake's confused voice came over the speaker, clear to both of us. I'm taking a ceramics class, remember? I told you yesterday I'd be home by 9. Is something wrong? I watched as Linda's face changed from triumph to confusion to something close to panic as she realized her assumption had been completely wrong. Ceramics? I repeated innocently, as if I'd temporarily forgotten. Oh, yeah, silly me. Your mother was really worried you might be having an affair with all those long hours away from home. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. Then Jake's voice was cold and puzzled. She thought I was having an affair? Why would she think that? What did I do to make her suspicious? I handed the phone directly to Linda, forcing her to explain her unfounded suspicions and accusations to her son. She frantically fussed, trying to back down and downplay what she had said, but the damage had already been done. Jake was hurt and confused by his mother's immediate assumption of infidelity, especially when he was doing something positive and creative. I was just worried about the change in your routine. Linda stammered into the phone. Mother notices things like that. I didn't mean to imply anything inappropriate, but you said I was having an affair. Jake's voice was clear. You told my wife that men look elsewhere when they aren't properly cared for. What did you mean? The conversation continued for several more awkward minutes, with Linda becoming increasingly conflicted and Jake becoming increasingly frustrated with his mother's assumptions about his character and the marriage. He agreed to meet us again at the apartment for what he called a serious family conversation about boundaries and trust. When I got home, I prepared everything carefully. Hidden cameras had captured Linda's latest infractions, including footage of her going through our personal belongings, reading my journal, and taking more explicit photographs. I compiled everything into a detailed presentation that even Jake's lifelong training could not allow him to deny or rationalize. When Jake returned home 20 minutes later, still wearing his clay-stained apron and looking genuinely hurt by his mother's assumptions, Linda immediately went into aggressive damage control mode. She cried that she was a caring mother who only wanted to protect her son's happiness. She claimed to have seen warning signs of trouble in the marriage that any experienced woman would recognize. She insisted that she was simply trying to help us sort out our obvious difficulties before they became serious threats to our relationship. I think it's time for us all to sit down and have a completely honest conversation, I said calmly, setting my laptop on the coffee table. I began a slideshow of the recorded conversations from the morning Linda had revealed her true intentions. Her voice came through the speakers, clear and unmistakable, detailing how she planned to destroy me if I ever tried to interfere with her relationship with Jake. Jake's face went from confusion to horror to disgust as he listened to his mother's casual threats against his wife. Mom, what the hell is this? he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. "Did you really say that to my wife?" Linda immediately denied it, her voice reaching hysterical pitch. "She's manipulating you with technology. She's probably edited these recordings with computer software. You can't trust anything she shows you. This is exactly the kind of deception I tried to warn you about." The next section displayed explicit photos, not the explicit ones Linda had taken of me, but screenshots showing metadata and timestamps. The technical evidence confirmed that the surveillance had been systematic and had been going on for months, documenting my daily routines in obsessive detail. "These pictures were taken in our bedroom while I was sleeping," I explained to Jake, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. "And in our bathroom while I was showering. Your mother has been secretly photographing me for months without my knowledge or consent." Jake looked at his mother with growing disgust and disbelief. "You photographed my wife without permission in our private spaces while she was naked." Linda's patience had finally worn thin. "I protected you from her influence. She is not the woman for you. I see things you cannot see. I know what's best for my son." The third section showed financial records proving that Linda had used Jake's credit card to purchase surveillance equipment. She'd bought hidden cameras, recording devices, even GPS tracking equipment that she'd secretly installed in my car. "She's been tracking my movements," I told Jake. "She knows where I go, who I talk to. She's been building a detailed profile of my life without my knowledge." Jake's hands shook as he reviewed the evidence on my laptop. "Mom, this is criminal behavior. This is stalking. How long has this been going on?" 2 weeks after we got married," I answered quietly. "She started documenting everything about our life together almost immediately." The fourth section contained transcripts of phone calls Linda had made to my workplace in an attempt to get me fired by spreading false rumors about my professional competence and personal behavior. She claimed I was untrustworthy, that I had made inappropriate comments about patients, that I had stolen drugs from the hospital. She was trying to ruin my career, I explained. She called my boss 6 times with fictitious complaints about my work performance. The last piece of evidence was the most compelling. Live video testimony from Sarah and Jake's other ex-girlfriends. I set up video calls with their permission so they could tell Jake directly about Linda's previous campaigns of harassment and psychological manipulation. Sarah appeared on the laptop screen first, older now, but still visibly shaken as she spoke of Linda's reign of terror in her life. "She made every day hell," Sarah said, her voice shaking with the memory of fear. "Constant surveillance, manipulation, threats to arrest me or put me in a mental institution. I finally left because I couldn't take it anymore, and I was too afraid to tell you the truth about why." Sarah described specific instances that Jake remembered differently, moments when she seemed paranoid or irrational, accusing Linda of unthinkable things. Jake was forced to confront the reality that his mother had been gaslighting both him and his girlfriend, manipulating situations to make Sarah look unstable. Then Maria showed up, detailing how Linda had sabotaged her work and planted evidence to make her look unfaithful. She showed documents supporting the false accusations Linda had made of her employer, fake text messages sent from her phone. "I tried so hard to prove my innocence," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "But your mother was always one step ahead. She destroyed the evidence before I could show it to you. When I accused her of sabotage, she looked so shocked and hurt, you thought I was having some kind of nervous breakdown." Rebecca's testimony was equally devastating. She described financial sabotage, planted evidence, a systematic campaign to convince Jake she was a gold digger and an identity thief. "I loved you," Rebecca said directly to Jake through the screen. "But I couldn't fight your mother and win. She had too much power over your perception of reality." Jake sat in stunned silence as 3 different women described identical patterns of abuse spanning more than a decade. When the final video call ended, he turned to his mother, tears streaming down his face. "How could you do this to the people I care about?" he whispered, his voice breaking with grief. "How could you do this to me? You ruined my relationships. You ruined my ability to trust my own judgment." Linda made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. She collapsed dramatically to the floor, clutching her chest and claiming her heart was pounding. She begged for forgiveness through choked sobs, insisting she had acted only out of motherly love and concern for his future happiness. I was protecting you from women who would hurt you, she cried. I was saving you from making terrible mistakes. Everything I did was because I love you more than anyone else ever could. But Jake had finally seen through the act that had controlled him his entire life. Get out of our house, he said calmly, his voice filled with more grief than I had ever heard before. Jake, please, you have to understand. Get out, he screamed. It was the first time I had heard him raise his voice to anyone, much less his mother. And give me every key you have to this place. Every single one. Right now. Linda stood unsteadily, her fake medical emergency forgotten in the face of her son's refusal. She pulled several keys from her purse. Not just copies of our apartment keys, but the keys to Jake's office, his car, even his gym. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold and menacing. When she breaks your heart and leaves you alone, don't come crying to me. If anyone breaks my heart, Jake replied, it will be because you taught me not to trust them. Linda left that evening, but her campaign of harassment escalated, dramatically in the weeks that followed. She called Jake constantly, day and night, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to venomous threats. She showed up at his workplace, causing a scene in the lobby until security was forced to escort her out. She contacted every member of Jake's extended family, spreading vicious rumors about me and claiming that I had somehow brainwashed her innocent son against his loving mother. She created fake social media accounts to stalk and terrorize us both online. She sent anonymous letters to our neighbors, claiming that we were drug dealers and domestic abusers. She even hired a private investigator to follow me, gathering more evidence for whatever legal strategy she was planning. The turning point came when she filed a false police report, claiming that I had threatened her with a knife in the kitchen the last time we met. This forced me to spend 6 hours at the police station, proving my innocence with surveillance footage from our building and neighbors' testimonies. That's when I decided to play my final, most devastating card. I saved the most compelling evidence for just this situation. A recording I'd obtained during my investigation of Linda, admitting to another family member that she'd made completely fictitious allegations against Sarah in an attempt to have her arrested for domestic violence. In our state, intentionally filing false police reports was a serious felony, carrying significant prison time. I took my carefully organized evidence to the district attorney's office and asked to speak to a prosecutor who specialized in stalking and harassment cases. She was a middle-aged woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who had made her career fighting for victims of psychological abuse. This is, frankly, one of the most thorough professional records of systematic stalking I've seen in my 20 years as a prosecutor, she said after reviewing my materials for 2 hours. We're definitely going to be filing multiple felony charges. Patricia explained that Linda's behavior met the legal definition of stalking, voyeurism, and criminal harassment. One false police report was enough for a criminal conviction, but additional evidence painted a picture of someone who posed a real threat to public safety. Women like her don't stop. They escalate until someone gets seriously hurt. You may have saved future victims by providing that evidence, Patricia said. Linda was arrested at her weekly yoga class Tuesday morning, handcuffed in front of all her friends, wearing designer workout clothes. Charges included criminal harassment, voyeurism, harassment, invasion of privacy, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Her high-priced lawyer tried desperately to portray her as a caring mother whose mental health had deteriorated due to grief over the loss of her son in an inappropriate relationship. He argued that she suffered from empty nest syndrome and depression, that her behavior was the result of untreated mental illness rather than criminal intent. But the mountain of evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor presented a chronology of systematic abuse involving multiple victims over several years. The jury heard testimony from 4 different women describing identical patterns of stalking and manipulation. During the trial, Jake was forced to testify against his own mother. His voice shook with emotion as he described feeling betrayed and manipulated by the person he trusted most in the world. He admitted to unknowingly losing several significant relationships to Linda's underhanded meddling, but was too psychologically programmed to recognize the patterns of abuse. I thought she was protecting me, Jake said from the witness stand. I thought these women were leaving because they didn't really love me. I never realized that my mother was deliberately pushing them away. Prosecutors also called expert witnesses to explain the psychological dynamics of maternal abuse and incestuous relationships. A forensic psychologist testified about Linda's manipulation techniques and their impact on both Jake and her victims. The defense tried to argue that Linda's behavior was motivated by love rather than malice, but the evidence clearly showed premeditation and intent. The purchase of surveillance equipment, the careful planning, the systematic destruction of evidence, none of it could be explained by the impulsive actions of a grieving mother. The judge, an older woman who had obviously handled similar cases before, showed no mercy in her sentencing. Linda was given 3 years in prison, 5 years of probation, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and a permanent restraining order that legally prohibited any contact with Jake or me for the rest of her life. The court finds the defendant's actions to be calculated, systematic, and deeply harmful, the judge said at sentencing. She used her position as a mother to manipulate and abuse multiple victims over a period of years. Such behavior demonstrates a complete disregard for the autonomy and dignity of others. The hardest part of the ordeal was watching Jake's psychological world unravel. He spent 34 years believing that his mother was his greatest protector and source of unconditional love, only to discover that she was, in fact, the destroyer of his happiness and relationships. This discovery forced him to question every major decision he had ever made, every failed relationship, every moment he had chosen his mother's judgment over his own instincts. He constantly blamed himself for not recognizing the signs sooner, for not protecting me and his previous girlfriends from her systematic abuse. He went through periods of intense guilt, wondering if he had somehow been complicit in his mother's crimes by being so easily manipulated. We began intensive couples therapy with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and manipulation. Jake had to learn to make personal decisions without his mother's constant influence, to trust his own judgment about people and situations, and to put our relationship above entrenched family obligations. The therapeutic process was painful and slow. Jake had to confront decades of psychological programming and manipulation. He had to mourn the mother he thought he had while accepting the reality of who she really was. Some days I was angry, resenting the years of lies and control. Other days I was hurting, mourning the loss of what he believed was unconditional love. I don't know how to trust myself, he admitted during one particularly difficult session. Every decision I've ever made has been influenced by her. How am I supposed to know what I really want versus what she's programmed me to want? The therapist helped him understand that recovering from such psychological abuse takes time and patience. She taught him techniques for recognizing manipulation, trusting his emotions and instincts, and establishing healthy boundaries with family members. Linda served 26 months before being paroled for good behavior. Within 2 weeks of her release, she violated the restraining order by sending Jake a handwritten letter claiming to have found God in prison and begging for forgiveness. The letter described her supposed spiritual transformation and contained what she claimed were prophecies about the failure of our marriage without her guidance. She is currently back in prison, serving the remainder of her original sentence, plus an additional 18 months for violating her parole. Her attorney has said she plans to appeal the violation, arguing that the letter was not an attempt at contact, but a religious testimony that happened to be addressed to her son. Jake and I immediately moved across the country after her rearrest. We bought a small house in Oregon with a state-of-the-art security system and multiple cameras monitoring every entrance. The house sits on 2 acres of wooded land, giving us a privacy and peace we never experienced during Linda's reign of terror. Trust no longer comes easily, but we are slowly building something authentic together. Something that is uniquely ours and not his mother's warped vision of familial loyalty. Jake is learning to make decisions based on his own values and desires, not his programmed need for his mother's approval. We have developed new traditions that have nothing to do with Linda's expectations. Jake's pottery has become a passion that brings him true joy. He created a studio in our basement where he spends hours working with clay, finally free to pursue his artistic interests without fear of criticism or ridicule. Last spring, Jake proposed to me again in our new garden, not because he felt obligated or because his mother had finally approved, but because he had chosen me freely and completely. He wanted to replace all the tarnished memories of our first engagement with something pure and untouched. The proposal was simple and perfect. Just the two of us in a garden he had planted himself, surrounded by flowers he had chosen based on what he liked, not what his mother thought was appropriate. He made the engagement ring himself in his ceramic studio, a unique ceramic ring that no one else in the world had. Sarah flew in from Boston to attend our small engagement party. She found significant healing in knowing that Linda had finally been held accountable for years of psychological terrorism. The other ex-girlfriends joined us via video link. all grateful to have their experiences finally validated and acknowledged. You accomplished what none of us could, Sarah told me as we watched Jake laugh with my brother. You fought back instead of running. You saved not only yourself, but likely future victims too. The engagement party was small but meaningful. My family, a few close friends, and the support group we had built during our recovery. No one from Jake's side was present except for one cousin, who had also been a victim of Linda's manipulative tactics over the years. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I could have handled the situation differently, if I could have found a gentler way to open Jake's eyes to his mother's true nature. But Linda was a calculating predator who had perfected her manipulation techniques on vulnerable young women for decades. Soft approaches and rational conversations would not have penetrated the psychological fortress she had built around her son. The trauma specialist we worked with explained that people like Linda are essentially emotional vampires who feed on control and power over others. They don't respond to kindness or appeals to their better selves because they lack the capacity for genuine empathy. The only language they understand is consequences, legal boundaries, and loss of access to their victims. Jake still struggles daily with guilt, anger, and grief toward his mother. Sometimes he misses the woman he thought she was, mourning a loving parent who never really existed. He had to accept that the mother he remembered from childhood was mostly a representation, designed to ensure his loyalty and dependency. I keep waiting for relief, he told me recently. But mostly I just feel sad. I'm grieving for someone who never existed, but he's slowly building new, healthier relationships. With my family, who accept him unconditionally, with friends who support our love rather than try to control it, and with therapists who are helping him process the complex trauma of discovering that his primary caregiver was actually an abuser. We're planning our second wedding for next fall. It will be small and intimate, surrounded only by people who genuinely want us to be happy together. Jake is learning to trust his own instincts about people, to believe that he deserves love without manipulation or conditions. Wedding planning has been therapeutic for both of us. Jake makes decisions based on what he really wants, not what he thinks he should want. He has chosen colors, flowers, and music that reflect his personal taste, not someone else's expectations. This feels like my first real choice, he said as we sampled wedding cakes. Everything else in my life has been influenced by it, but this is ours. We have also formed a small support group for adult children of manipulative parents. Jake finds healing in helping others recognize and avoid similar patterns of psychological abuse. He has become an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, speaking at conferences and seminars about his experiences. And if Linda somehow manages to get out early and tries to contact us again, I have saved every piece of documentation that proves her guilt in several safe places. The digital files are backed up in the cloud with multiple access points. The physical documents are stored in safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks. I have a network of other survivors who will support each other if any of our abusers try to reestablish contact. I know exactly how to build a flawless legal case. I have contacts in law enforcement who understand the seriousness of stalking and stalking crimes. I have lawyers who specialize in restraining orders and victim protection. And I am no longer afraid to use every weapon in my arsenal to protect what matters most to me. The fearful, confused woman who once allowed her mother-in-law to trample on her privacy and dignity is gone without a trace. In her place stands a person who knows her worth, sets ironclad boundaries, and will do whatever it takes to protect those she loves. Some of Jake's extended family still call me vindictive and cruel for sending Linda to jail, rather than simply cutting off contact and moving away quietly. They argue that family issues should be resolved privately, that involving the court system was an overreaction to what they see as typical mother-in-law boundary issues. But I call this justice done exactly as it should have been. She committed serious crimes and would have continued to escalate her behavior if she had not been stopped. Jake deserves a mother who loves him unconditionally, who wants him to be truly happy, even if that means sharing him with someone else. Because Linda proved incapable of being that person, she forever lost the right to be anyone in his life. The last I heard from Jake's cousin, Linda was telling anyone in prison who would listen that I was a manipulative witch who cast some kind of spell to steal her precious son away from his loving family. She's probably right about the witch part, though. I definitely cast a spell, the kind that makes toxic, abusive mothers-in-law disappear forever behind bars where they can't hurt anyone else. And I don't regret it one bit.